Welcome to Birth, Death, and Doulas, a podcast by the Global Doula Project, which is a nonprofit on a mission to transform the way we experience birth and death by making doula support accessible and affordable to families around the world. I'm your host, Anne Kathryn Rice. Today on the podcast, I interview three incredible individuals who are working to infuse compassion into the postpartum period in all their own ways. Let me introduce them. Alex White works for a nonprofit organization called Our Children, Our with an H, like the time, whose mission is to support incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and their children.
My name is Alex White. I'm a postpartum doula, a board-certified lactation consultant in private practice, and I also work for an organization called Our Children. We work within 3 women's correctional facilities in New York State: Bedford Hills, Taconic, and Rikers in New York City. Our work is primarily to support women experiencing incarceration and post-incarceration. So to that end, we run parenting programs in each of those facilities. We oversee a nursery program inside Bedford. And inside Bedford, I provide care to all the pregnant and postpartum people. And I also run the doula program, which gives me the great privilege to train folks experiencing incarceration to also become postpartum doulas and provide care to the pregnant postpartum folks that are residing at Bedford with and without their babies.
Alex reached out to the Global Doula Project at the end of 2024 to tell us about a postpartum doula training that she was organizing for several women at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. Women at Bedford can have their babies with them for the entire first year of life. Alex told me that she had already held a postpartum doula training for a group of women there, and they were truly enthusiastic about developing skills and supporting each other. And in order for these women to have a credential that is a bit more recognized by insurance companies and federal funders than doula training by Alex, she organized a training by DONA International. DONA stands for Doulas of North America, but it has now grown to include doulas and trainers outside of North America, and in fact has become probably the most widely known organization that trains doulas. And having that piece of paper would give these women a widely recognized credential when they finish their sentence and are ready to work outside of the prison. Global Doula Project was really honored to partner with Our Children and provide this training. Alex was able to put together a dream team of sorts because she contacted Nubia and Jen to guide the group and share their wisdom.
My name is Nubia Earth-Martin, and I run a nonprofit organization called Birth on the Earth that's based in Yonkers, but we serve Westchester County, we serve the Bronx, Harlem, the surrounding areas, and we're just dedicated to improving maternal health outcomes. I'm also a mother of 5. I am a home birth midwife. And my role at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, after getting connected with Alex, was to come in and train some of the beautiful women there to be able to support each other during their pregnancies and their labor and birth and postpartum, and just talk about the importance of having that communal support and improving outcomes for themselves and their babies.
Jen Chandlee is a DONA International postpartum doula trainer located in North Carolina, and she traveled up to New York, especially for the training at Bedford Hills.
I am in Wilmington, North Carolina, and I've been a birth worker for over 30 years in many different capacities on the birth and postpartum side of things. And about 8 years ago, I had an opportunity to step into a trainer role. I'd been a midwife's assistant, a birth doula, childbirth educator for over 20 years at that point, and I just really started to see postpartum families falling through the cracks in a bigger way than ever
Mhm.
before. And so I really wanted to advocate on a much larger scale for postpartum support for families.
In this touching interview, Nubia, Jen, and Alex share about their experiences at Bedford Hills, supporting women who will go on to support countless others, with compassion and without judgment, both inside and outside of prison walls. This is the 5th episode of Birth, Death, and Doulas. Okay, so you were mostly in like conversation mode, talking about the importance of community support.
Yeah, talking about, just, continuous support in labor and postpartum and how that can improve outcomes for lactation, how that can improve outcomes for, the mode of delivery. And really just, talking about how disparities can impact, expectant moms even outside of, being incarcerated, but what that looks like, on the inside and how that can still be, a situation where that level of continuous support can positively impact, their birth experience.
Mm-hmm. And this, Alex, you were mentioning this has to do with ethics that is a requirement of the DONA certification process.
Yeah, DONA now has, and I'm sure maybe Jen can speak to this better than I can, but now has an equity requirement as part of the certification process, which is incredibly valuable to grounding people in the work of where we're working in communities and the history of birth work culturally and in this country. So, and I don't know when it was instituted, but I imagine it was just in the last few years, given the cultural changes in this country and awakenings in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's hear from Jen now about the equity.
I think, I can only speak from my own perspective. I'm certainly not a spokesperson for the organization. DONA was founded by really incredible human beings with the best of intentions. But there were some blind spots racially in early leadership. And so it just for the simple fact that these were 5 people who knew each other who happened to be white who started the organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was not a deliberate, intentional thing. However, the doula profession, when it became a profession, was by and large, by white people for white people, similar to how midwifery in the United States, in the 70s with the Back to the Land movement and the hippie communes became by white people for white people. And even though historically that work and the skills of that work were global. And so now equity is built into the ethics, as Alex said, of the organization.
So what does a postpartum doula do at Bedford?
A postpartum doula at Bedford's not dissimilar to a postpartum doula anywhere else. Just because you happen to be experiencing incarceration doesn't mean your needs as a parent differs that much more from folks that are having babies in the community. It does mean that we're working with people with a major intersection of marginalization in community right now, based off of their experiences before they entered our program and depending on where they'll be reentering to. So, a lot of postpartum doulas are actively involved in their communities, not just providing care, but making sure we're creating infrastructure and networks of care. So it's not just about this one moment in which you're reaching a dyad, but what happens afterwards. Because, sort of philosophically, for me, I won't speak for training organizations, we focus a lot on the dyad, but we forget a lot about the other cultural and societal impacts that are impacting families. So it can't just be the moment that I step foot inside someone's home or someone's room inside Bedford, but what happens after our care officially ends and how are we setting people up to be cared for once they leave our space and move into other spaces and move into other communities. So at Bedford, we do a lot of reentry work, which just means that we're setting people up for resources for when they're no longer a part of our program, which a lot of postpartum doulas do in community already. It's not unique to us. Our role is to step in and to meet the needs of the parents wherever they are in that moment, sort of without judgment, without our own idea of what that might mean, to provide the highest level of care that we can, knowing that folks are ownerships of their own bodies, their own families, their own experiences. They know what they need more than I know what they need. So whether I'm working in private practice or I'm working inside Bedford, those principles are the same.
So when you say setting people up for their future,
Yeah.
does it also mean brainstorming with them about what they would like to do when they are released and helping them make connections outside of Bedford?
hmm Yeah, we
Okay.
work really hard as a program, and this is, not unique to me as a postpartum doula, but as a program to make sure that folks have safe housing to return to, that they have resources from um, soap and shampoo and conditioner to their medical appointments, their mental health appointments, things like that are set up when they leave, and they're connected with broader community resources wherever they plan to return to. And whenever possible, we do try to encourage folks to return to areas that we know are really well resourced. There's parts of New York State that are not well resourced to support families. So if we can help to provide folks with housing, I didn't mention before, but we have 5 buildings in New York City where we do reentry housing for folks post-incarceration. So it's a part of the sort of wraparound support that we hope to provide to moms and their children when they're leaving incarceration and they're figuring out what their next steps are.
Mhm. Well, when I first heard about your program and incarcerated individuals supporting fellow incarcerated individuals, I thought it's so beautiful because it's so important for doulas to, have that matching live shared experience
Sure.
to really feel comfortable and be able to create a strong bond. I mean, I'm just projecting because I've never been to Bedford, but it seems like incarcerated individuals might be spoken down to a lot. And
Sure.
this would be that time when they're not, when they're treated, as the life-giving force that they are.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this is it's a incredibly tricky time. I mean, to be pregnant and to be raising small humans is a difficult job as is, but then to be doing it in a setting in which it's not set up for nurture, for your success, to then create this infrastructure of like a whole community of care, whether it's folks like me that get to walk in and out every day, but or folks that live there that provide the care. I think it's incredibly powerful. Um, and, certification is a funny thing because our ability to provide care for one another does not require us to have a piece of paper that says that now we've been trained to provide care to one another. It's a thing that is innate. And most people are doing that anyway without a piece of paper that says they're good at that already. So we pursue certification because we know it gives people something to prove when they go out into the world if they want to do this work that's meaningful in the society in which we work. But um, they're already doing that work, and it is quite powerful. I think it's quite powerful for them to be able to give that care, and it's quite powerful for folks to receive that care.
One beautiful thing about doula training is that we remind people that the caregiving it's within them
Mhm.
already and,
Mhm.
bringing it out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Nubia, you said you are also a midwife?
Correct. Yes.
So
Yeah.
you are a doula and a midwife? No.
Well, I worked as labor support for many years from 2008 until I decided to pursue midwifery in 2014. So I think, I'm always going to be a labor support, person at heart. But yes, moved more into the clinical aspects of being able to help people when they want to give birth outside of the hospital, system. Um, and, for those who are having healthy low risk pregnancies, being able to create access to home birth as, another viable option for a place to welcome your baby. Um, I just wanted to jump back to what Alex was just saying in terms of, it was a honor to be able to kind of provide this certificate of completion. But really, sitting there and spending that day with that group of women was incredibly profound to hear their lived experiences, both before they were incarcerated and now while they were incarcerated, in the way in which they had created this network of support within each other. And what struck me was multiple people said that their experiences in the postpartum period immediately after giving birth were better while they were incarcerated than when they weren't because of that communal support. And that
Yeah.
really, like, that hit me for a moment, but it also made me think back to the history of J. Marion Sims, who, as we know, is the, quote unquote, father of modern gynecology here. And in the renditions of the stories of him, doing these surgeries and healing these women, it was really the communal support of those women who all went through those surgeries, without anesthesia, them surrounding each other because of that same lived experience of, we just went through that trauma. We know what you're going to need to heal on the other side. That was really what, helped them to survive that atrocity. So thinking about those two, they're very different, but they also have similarities. So when I was listening to the stories, I feel like that was the most that part, the day hit me the most. And it still, stays with me. All of their, stories about even in preparing to go in to give birth, like, okay, still early labor, don't go in too early because we want you to have the best outcome. And, we're all going to help you breathe through this. And when you come back, we know the people on staff here who are going to be more supportive of lactation. So just the way that they've been able to navigate to make sure that they're still having a positive experience. But the points about having a better experience within that system that has been fostered there, that I think that
That's
was a very
amazing.
eye-opening moment for me. Yeah.
Yeah,
That,
they do it so beautifully. We just
yeah.
finished another like internal cohort this past week,
Okay.
and we were talking about how we develop our resource list, right? That's the thing we have to do as doulas. Who are we going to refer to on the outside? And we do that on the inside. I'm like, who's the law clerk in the legal library that you're going to send them to for this specific instance? You are the resource on that here, They don't know when to go pick up their packages when their package is going to, oh, this is the sergeant you need to talk to because this is the sergeant that's going to help you. Like they are providing the support to figure out how to navigate this new and complicated world with a new baby. And it only functions because of these doulas who have this lived experience of being inside, who understand the system more than I ever will. I'm 7 years inside and I know it decently, but it's not my own lived experience.
I talk about this all the time, the power of community and how we need each other. And Global Doula Project is founded on the premise that we are wired to expect support and we need each other. But I never would have thought that the power of community just that it would be stronger in a prison than for someone than outside of a prison.
Totally.
I mean,
And
we
let's
really
not,
are missing community.
sure. I was going to say, and let's not paint a rosier picture
Right,
than what it is,
right,
right? I
right,
mean,
right.
people experiencing incarceration is still a trauma in its own right. People are re-traumatized through incarceration. And it is I think this program is a great gift to people who are pregnant in New York State, even though we always prefer people to be able to birth in their own communities within their own support structures. That's the best case scenario. Any alternative incarceration is the best scenario, but it's still quite tricky. But yes, it is saying something that somebody feels more support during this brief stay that they have with us than they have with their previous 1 or 6 babies that they've had before. We certainly have set up a very strange culture in which we return home to be alone with our newborn babies without being, encircled in the arms of our family members and community to care for us. It's certainly not the way that it should be.
And do you know anything about how the decision was made that the mothers at Bedford Hills could be with their baby for, is it 12 months?
So it's a law that's been on the books in New York State for about 100 years. We're considered the first ever sort of formal prison nursery in the country. And it's Corrections Law 611. It entitles folks in New York State who are detained or have been sentenced if they give birth during that custody to have their babies with them for up to 12 months. If they'll be released to the community, they've served their sentence before the baby turns 18 months, they can apply for an extension and the baby can stay with them for up to 18 months. And we're the one state nursery at the moment. There used to be 2, one at the another medium security prison, and then in Rikers in New York City, which is a jail, but they have a nursery. And then there's a couple counties that have sort of itinerant nurseries that can accommodate babies. Not with the same level of infrastructure. Our program has me for lactation and doula support. We have a full-time caseworker and nursery manager who manages the operations and the day-to-day goings on. We have a part-time social worker therapist. And we have a daycare that's run by a woman who's part of our team, and then all of our caregivers are also folks who are trained caregivers and currently also experiencing incarceration. So there's a ton of infrastructure in place within the program to make it work for people.
It gives me hope actually to know this, because if someone is incarcerated, they do need help, and
Mhm.
especially, and they will be leaving at some point, and
Mhm.
you are setting them up for success. Just it makes sense.
Well, we certainly hope so. I think in
Mhm.
programs like ours and similar to ours, that it can be hard to get hard and fast recidivism rates, but there's I think 7 or 8 different nursery programs in the country right now, and I think on average we all consider our recidivism rate to be somewhere in the 3 to 4% range.
What's that word?
So
Risk.
recidivism is a risk of reoffense, if somebody reoffends and then is returned into custody in the state. And it's not to say how wonderful we are or that you know, we are the saviors, because there's a lot of problematic thinking in that. But there's certainly something to be said that if you pour resources into people, people do well. And folks that enter our program typically have not had resources poured into them wherever they've been living before.
Mhm. Jen, what came up for you during the training?
Hmm. I could echo what Nubia said, as one of the things that struck me really deeply early on was the sentiment that was expressed by a few of the women of how much support they had and community inside, versus, when they had their first babies when they were not incarcerated. So that was, for me, also kind of a wow. Um, that really is a reflection on our society, and how people are not being held um, in the postpartum time. I very much, and this is true for any training that I facilitate. Uh, we all, as was already mentioned, anybody with a caring heart and willing hands is already able to do this work. I only see my role as a trainer as being this tiny piece of helping folks who need the piece of paper to navigate systems. So the certification and the piece of paper, we could, argue around and around all day about the validity and the need for those things. But because of the culture we currently live in the United States, these pieces of paper are becoming more and more of a necessity, unfortunately. Um, there are even states now talking about licensing, you know, doulas, which I'm fundamentally opposed to. Um, so, I'm a walking contradiction. I say that all the time. I came into this work not even knowing what a doula was, and I was offering labor and postpartum support without having a name for it for over a decade before I even, encountered the idea of becoming certified. So it's just an interesting place to be. Um, but I do feel with the training at Bedford Hills, it was such an honor, truly. And I know it sounds cliche, but it really just was such a deep honor to be there with that group of women. Um, it's just still so moving. I could cry thinking about it a year later. Really profound how they are caring for one another within this system that often doesn't care for them. And this stark contrast of having moments within the training of feeling this deep sense of connectedness and community and camaraderie. And then, the contrast of these sort of wake up moments of remembering where we are and why we're
Sure.
there. So it was a lot of that for me,
Sure.
you know, feeling
Yeah, zooming in and zooming
connection,
out.
feeling community, being just in awe of their support of one another. And then this sort of shock of like, right. And then this is the context within which they are living and having this experience.
Yeah, and I'll
Yeah.
just add, I'll say, I feel like with my role of talking about the ethics of it, obviously we had to talk about the existing disparities, in maternal health, as well. So as much as it was great to talk about the ways in which they were going to show up for each other, and like, Alex was saying, the different resources and who you can connect to, and if this is coming up, who do I reach out to? All of that. We had to just talk about the bigger picture that there are, things in place that put, certain people at more of a risk. And when we were having the conversation, I feel like, the art of storytelling is such a powerful tool to use, just to kind of be able to put into context and make it more relatable. So it naturally happened that everybody was kind of just talking about their, prior experiences. And again, without talking about specifics, one person saying that they had, 2 C-sections and were told they could not, have another, or 1 C-section and would not be able to have another baby because of the risk of having a C-section. And then somebody else talking about having an initial C-section and going on to have 3, vaginal births afterwards. And they were different, ethnic backgrounds. And we were talking about how that often happens if we, are not able to advocate. So then it was kind of like an eye-opening moment where people were like, oh, wait, yeah, in my experience, I didn't have this offered to me, or nobody spoke to me about this. And somebody else saying, oh, yeah, like every visit they talked to me about, et cetera. So kind of like leveling the playing field a little bit to, say that while it was beautiful for the overall, theme to be, we feel more supported, in this setting, also that is because in this bigger, society, we do have things in place that specifically increase the risks for certain groups of people. So
Yeah.
I think that, is important to kind of give that, context to, as well.
Yeah.
Were they surprised about that? That
Yeah.
they
Yeah, I
Yeah.
were?
think most people are, regardless when we're
Yeah.
having these conversations. I still think as much as we're talking every day, in groups and organizations, about the disparities, I think it is still shocking to hear. It's shocking to hear the stats, but then it's shocking when you're actually hearing like the qualitative, data, when you're like, oh wait, okay, so in when I was giving birth and this happened, oh, that's what was actually taking place. Where I think when we hear the numbers that 80% of poor outcomes are what we consider to be preventable, and that in the US, Black women tend to die 3 to 4 times more than their white counterparts, and here in New York, an even larger rate, 8 to 12 times, more. So there are a lot of different things that contribute to that. And I think those numbers alone are obviously concerning, and that's why we all do the work that we're doing. But when you actually have, different experiences, or somebody, yes, who's had, a loss of a child, or a mother that's no longer with us, that kind of puts it more into, oh, this is actually taking place. And then people do want to know, well, what are the things that are contributing? So we talked a lot about that, as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did any of the women, or did you address how to combat these horrible statistics?
Yeah, yeah. So we talked a lot about, just the awareness of knowing that these things exist where, sometimes providers will say, oh, well, because you are a Black woman, you're automatically more at risk for, everything. Gestational diabetes, hypertension, preeclampsia, you'll probably need to be induced. You'll probably need, all of these things. And then to be able to put it into perspective of, well, what actually puts somebody at risk, right? And what are modifiable things, right? I can't change the fact that I'm a Black woman, right? That's not going to change. However, there are things that can be done that can increase our chances of having a healthier outcome, and to not have somebody label you high risk just because of how you present but what am I doing in my lifestyle? What are the things that I'm doing to improve my chances of having a healthy pregnancy? Don't just risk me out or give me, a certain type of care because you assume I'm already going to be at risk for these things. So we did talk a lot about that. And I think that's when we got into the conversation about the nuances of knowing, okay, who to go to for this and if you need that, and, how they've been able to kind of navigate some of those things, even if they didn't have a name for it, to know that these are some of the disparities and things that are happening and biases that people experience. They have been experiencing it, not necessarily having a name for it. So it was kind of just putting some information there so they understand these are things that exist within the incarceration system, but then also in greater society too.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It,
Yeah.
in a way, is it calling out racism? Is it putting a name to it and saying that's racist?
Yeah. And having real conversations about what that looks like, and then not just stopping at, oh, it's racist, so that's what you're going to deal with. But then how do we now navigate that? How do we have conversations about that? How do we bring ethical behavior back into the care that we're getting, regardless of where we're receiving, care? I think that was a big part of the conversation as well, that you can still have a dignified experience in the birth setting and also in the postpartum period, even when we're navigating all these tricky, spaces, whether it's within, Bedford Hills or even, outside in the greater society, that there are these challenges that exist in both spaces. And it really is about, again, like Alex said, knowing your resources, knowing who you can rely on, knowing who you can bring these issues to. But first you have to be aware that they exist. And I think they,
Right.
they were, and they've been very, strategic in how they have been able to make this beautiful, container or calabash that they're all able to pour into each other from. So it was kind of like identifying, also not just amongst the staff of, who would you go to if you needed something, but who amongst this group, who's the person you go to when you just need to talk to somebody? Who's the one who has the most, lactation experience? So that was what, that was the beautiful, kind of energy in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah, knowing who you can trust. It's so sad to say that you can't trust everyone and you have to pick and choose, I guess, especially on the outside when you're meeting new people. So having to do research before contacting a professional and seeing um, if they in fact listen. It seems like such a basic thing for us doulas, but it's not a given that someone asks a question and then really listens to the answer.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. And we
Agreed.
talked a lot also about just advocating, for oneself and advocating amongst each other. And I mentioned I co-wrote a curriculum called ACT. It's a acronym, but it's part of the Black Coalition for Safe Motherhood. And the acronym ACTT stands for asking questions until you understand the answers, claiming your space, trusting your body, and then telling your story. And I always say that I think the most important piece of that is the telling your story, so that people, learn from hearing other people's stories. Obviously, yes, asking questions. Sometimes, you're in a space where you're limited for how many questions you can ask, or you're limited in the time, so really kind of pinpointing what's the most important piece of information that I need when I'm going to have this, interface with, my provider. How do I claim my space if I know that my visits are normally 5 to 10 minutes? What can I do in those 5 to 10 minutes to get the information that I need for the outcome that I want? And then, yeah, trusting your body. So that was really when they were talking about, not rushing. Oh, don't go with the first contraction. You want to kind of know, what's happening, and wait until you're in active labor so you have a better outcome and you actually get to the place where you're going to give birth. All of those things was, so it was ACT, they're already doing it. It was just, again, giving a name to it. So when we're talking about giving that certificate, they're already providing that support to each other. It was really just, okay, here's this, paper that's going to kind of allow you to continue to do this beautiful work that you're already, doing naturally and organically.
Mhm. Can you tell me the acronym again?
ACTT. Yeah.
And the A is for ask until you
Ask questions
understand?
until you understand the answers. Claim your space, both physical and mental. Trust your body and tell your story. Yeah. ACTT.
Okay.
Yeah.
claiming your space. Did you happen to do any practicing that sitting up straight, or I don't know?
We did, and if I'm remembering correctly, I also talked a little bit about somatics, like to kind of bring yourself back into your parasympathetic nervous system, right? Because that's something that can happen regardless of the setting that you're in. As soon as you're in front of a provider, sometimes people, immediately, clam up, or, you have all these questions in your head that you want to ask before you get there. And then you get there, and if there's not like a, hey, do you have any questions? It's how do I even introduce that into the conversation? So first, just getting back into your body. So we just did some easy like somatics, kind of rubbing the palms back and forth, and the shoulders, and the face, and just kind of seeing how that shifts the way in which your body goes out of that fight or flight kind of response, and gets you back into your parasympathetic nervous system. So that's a simple, quick thing that you can do, 1 to 2, minutes of, doing that even before the provider walks into the room, right? So just put yourself back into your body and focus on, okay, what are the main things that I need to get out of this visit?
I can imagine that a doula would be really helpful to have in that moment.
Mhm.
Even if the doula is not talking, just to help someone get
Yeah.
into that calm mode and not be in fight or flight. The physical touch, because you can do this with your own hands, but it's maybe more powerful to have that person next to you that you trust, that is giving you strength.
Right.
I talk on the postpartum side of things about how, which is now sadly where 2/3 of maternal deaths happen. A big point of advocacy for us as postpartum doulas is riding along to those visits, whether it's lactation or pediatrician or midwife or obstetrician, because, the sad fact is that humans behave better when there's a witness in the room. And so even if the doula isn't saying anything, just like you said, Anne Kathryn's being in that space as a witness and as a presence of support companion for the person that we're going with, the parent, is invaluable. It's really invaluable. Um, and really sad that that's the case, right? That care providers tend to behave better when they're eyes on. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you think there could be a birth doula program on the horizon?
I mean, I'd be thrilled. My incarcerated doulas want to be birth doulas. I mean, they would be beside themselves, as would I. I certainly would love it. It would be many years in the making. And, we have been approved from the state to bring in outside birth doulas. For several years, the law in New York State changed, and there are many hoops from a security perspective to make sure that that becomes actually available. We've been on the cusp of that being a real thing for quite some time. So at some point we will have civilian birth doulas, outside birth doulas that work with clients during pregnancy and then also are with them for labor and delivery. But it would be a great dream to train folks experiencing incarceration to also hold that space with folks during their labor. I don't know of any other programs that do it currently, and I'm always trying to leverage what's been successful in other programs. We don't always have to recreate the wheel ourselves.
I wonder if there might be any of the incarcerated individuals who were released or will be released that would want to come and be a birth doula for
Yeah, sure. I'm
someone.
sure they would love it. There are tricky prohibitions within the system when it pertains to being post-incarceration and your ability to then interact with the system in a civilian way. So there's lots of hoops. But I know people who are currently part of the program, currently living inside Bedford, that want to come back and work in Bedford afterwards. They understand how it works. They're so dedicated to the program and the people that are there for whatever period of time that they would love to come back and continue to be part of the work.
I'll just say, from my own experience in birth work, it was the care that I received, from my home birth, midwife that made me want to become a midwife. And I think it's the same, energy, here in being able to see the needs that somebody, has, and also knowing what it's like to be the person needing, that type of care, that there's something just human empathy that then makes you want to be a part of that. And that was, what I witnessed so beautifully sitting, that day and spending that time with that group of women. I'm just incredibly grateful, and honored to have spent that time, and wonderful for the connection with Alex, and, just all of the, navigation that it took to get there. It was absolutely 100%, worth it. So yeah, just really appreciative and happy to stay in, contact and keep hearing, the amazing things that are happening within that space.
Mhm.
I just am carrying this just embodied sense of still a year later being with that particular group of people, and just being so profoundly impacted by that experience, and really consistently remembering not to take my freedoms for granted,
Mhm.
because it is only by the sheer dumb luck of my birth that I am not on the other side of that fence, you know?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
as I was saying to Alex, I did a lot of dumb stuff when I was young. It
Mhm.
could easily have been
Same.
me.
Same.
And so I really, yeah, I just try not to take it for granted. And I hold those women really close to my heart all the time.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the world is hurting,
Mhm.
and doula support is one of the things that really can help us to heal, because we
Mhm.
focus on each other and helping each other. And as we are helping each other, we heal ourselves. You guys felt it there in that room. That energy was, I think, Jen, you said it at the beginning. I I took away so much from this.
Mhm.
And, you felt that that care
Mhm.
from the beginning.
And the courage to keep showing up and caring for one another
Mm.
within the midst of heartbreak and tragedy and
Mhm.
hardship and, loss of
Yeah.
freedom,
Mhm.
to still show up for other people.
Totally. I think it's such
Yeah.
a good point, Jen. Like this is optional. These are people that have opted in
Yeah.
Right.
to do a whole bunch of additional training, to show up for folks, to do overnights with parents, show up on the last minute when someone needs you. This is a choice that they're making to pour into other human beings during their time, which is also a struggle for them. So they are to be wildly commended for being such wonderful humans.
Absolutely.
We're incredibly lucky to have them.
Mhm.
Thank you all so much for sharing your experiences today.
Thank you for
Yeah.
having us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us,
Yeah.
and thank you so much for the support of the work. We couldn't have done it without the Global Doula Project, so we're really grateful for it.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
When your people need your teaching, let your vision be your guide. But if your money be your leader, then your power be divided. Oh yeah. When your people build your vision, let your teaching be on high. But if your power be your leader, then your spirit heaven denied. No matter what you're trying to do, you can't deny the truth.
Global Doula Project supports aspiring doulas like the women at Bedford Hills and doula organizations around the world. If you would like to make a donation so that more people can experience the power of doula support at the beginning and end of life, you can do so at our website at globaldoulaproject.org. Thank you for listening. I'm Anne Kathryn Rice, birth and postpartum doula and founder of the Global Doula Project. If you have a doula story to tell or you would like to get involved with the project, I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email at info@globaldoulaproject.org. I'll be back soon with another episode of Birth, Death, and Doulas.
Your blessings in your people, magnify. No matter what you're trying to do, you can't deny the truth. No, and what the people choose ain't really up to you. Actions always find a way to shine brighter than the things you say. Can't get around it. If you try, if you love them, then you magnify. No matter what you're trying to do, you can't deny the truth. No, and what the people choose ain't really up to you. Actions always find a way to shine brighter than the